What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Young Guns podcast. Today, we have Everyday Isles joining us to talk about a topic that has been pretty big in terms of the New York Islanders as of late. Will the New York Islanders miss or make the playoffs? We know that they went really big on getting Bo Horvat, who was arguably the best player available heading into the 2023 trade deadline. Then they add Pierre Engvall as well. And then they were quiet. But the New York Islanders have been doing very well as of late. And today we're just going to be talking about their chances of potentially making the playoffs. Where do they finish in the standings? And at the end of the day, when they make the playoffs, if they make the playoffs, what's the ideal matchup for the New York Islanders? So thank you so much for coming on today.
Awesome. Happy to get started.
So, looking at the New York Islanders and their lineup, we have Bo Horvat, who was newly acquired. He signed an extension, and Pierre Engvall, a player that they got from the Toronto Maple Leafs. What are your thoughts on this lineup as a whole? Are you confident heading into the playoffs if the Islanders do make the playoffs? Is this like an ideal lineup for the New York Islanders to compete with the likes of maybe the New Jersey Devils, the Carolina Hurricanes, or the Boston Bruins as a potential first round matchup?
This lineup right now, you can see some holes in some of the lines, especially throughout the season. You've seen Lane Lambert change around these lines what feels like 100,000 times. And there's definitely some gaps with Pajot, Barzell, still out with injury. I think Koivula is someone who is making that fourth line weaker, especially because you've seen the fourth line of Martin, Cizikas, Clutterbuck has obviously barely been a thing this season with injuries and shifting. I think that this lineup has me confident for the next couple games, but definitely this lineup right now I feel like would struggle to compete against some of those top teams with injuries and such. I think that some retooling can be done when we hopefully make the playoffs and get Barzell back. Pajot seems closer. Clutterbuck also seems closer to returning. So getting those guys back, I think would help, especially if there's a point where we clinch and all of that. I think getting those guys back would make this team playoff ready. Hopefully, those guys can get a couple games in before the playoffs.
And with the likes of Barzell, Clutterbuck, and other players returning from injury, what would be your ideal lineup heading into the playoffs?
It's hard to say, but you have some ideas, you brainstorm as a fan. I think Horvat on that top line is incredible. You have to keep him there. And Lee has worked well with him. I think, it's the easy choice to move Engvall, put Barzell back on that line. Koivula is the obvious choice to be sent back to Bridgeport. That's, no-brainer. Holmstrom, I don't think he'll be staying up full time just because, from now to playoffs, I think he's been, great. You don't see him getting those ice time, those big plays. He's been very good, but he's young and they're not going to sit, I just don't see Lambert sitting Bailey and Clutterbuck both. So someone's got to go down. I think those two guys will go down and Holmstrom will act as that 13th forward who will slot in here and there. I think that would be ideal for me. I think that fourth line of Martin, Cizikas, Clutterbuck is something that's going to have to split up a little bit. As much as 2016 fan me, that hurts a little bit. And I think, you like Nelson on that second line center. I like that second line a lot. I like that second line. I think you're going to have to, the bottom six is definitely going to have to move around, especially with Pajot coming back soon and Clutterbuck coming back soon. But I think moving Engvall to that third line, maybe Martin back to the fourth line, and putting Pajot on that third line. I think that just putting those guys where they're good is a great idea. You've seen it work before, especially, we haven't really seen this team at good health with Horvat. Maybe 2 games, especially sorry to interrupt you. Wahlstrom, I don't see him coming back before the end of the season, but I'm not a doctor. But if he comes back, I want to see Bailey sitting for him.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. When healthy, the New York Islanders could be a very scary team. And we know that, based off what we've seen when the team was healthy. Unfortunately for Barzell, it seems like he's better off on the wing than at center. As soon
Definitely.
as soon as Bo Horvat, entered the conversation, signs his extension, we know that Bo Horvat's going to be the first line center for years to come. Barzell is
Hmm.
going to be his winger for years to come.
Hmm.
And I would just like to get your thoughts on the whole Bo Horvat, trade, and also Pierre Engvall. Were the ideal pieces to get for the New York Islanders to compete in the playoffs? And what other moves were you hoping to see? Were you satisfied as a whole in terms of their deadline?
So great question, because I have a lot of thoughts on this one. I loved the Horvat trade. I thought that was a great deal. It was a deal that had to happen. Fans, practically begging for a change. It became hard to watch a team that can score one goal a game, averaging 1.5 goals in their last 5 games. That hurts. That's frustrating. He's a guy, instant problem solver. I loved that move. I thought that was a great deal by Lou. Obviously, losing a guy like Ratu, that's difficult. But as much as I loved what I saw from Ratu in his 12 games with us, you have to realize that Bo Horvat is an established NHLer. You know what you're gonna see from him. You have expectations for him. You know the effort he's gonna give night in, night out. He's gonna be scoring goals every third game. Aturatu, you never really know. This guy, I think he'll be great. He looked great, but this team needs an established player like Horvat. And Beauvillier I don't think he was going to ever thrive again in this system, just because the system was obviously not built for a player like Beauvillier. You see him thriving in Vancouver with his new line mates, and of course, I'm happy for him. But I think that was the best move possible for the Islanders, because Beauvillier, I don't think, was going to thrive here anymore. And, you're not going to get back a star player if you don't give up a guy who is either a star player or has potential to be a star player, like Aturatu. So I thought that was a great move, definitely.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And, good for Bovoli getting a chance to essentially move to Vancouver. Bovoli has been killing it. If I'm not mistaken, he's close to a point per game player. And
Mm-hmm.
it's nice to
Yes.
see that, especially being, drafted by the Islanders and developed for so many years. And we've seen so many flashes of brilliance from Bovoli, but it just seemed like it was never going to work out long term.
Mm-hmm.
But heading into the playoffs, because ideally I would say that the Islanders do make the playoffs, and I would like to see the New York Islanders make the playoffs because when you add a guy like Bo Horvat, you feel for the guy. He dealt with a lot of problems in Vancouver, a lot of problems with the media, a lot of problems within the locker, the
Mm-hmm.
management, and so on and so forth. Finally gets his extension that he wants, goes to a winning team, well, at least more wins than the Vancouver Canucks, to be exact. And you're just rooting for him to make the playoffs, New York Islanders. But the question is, though, can they still achieve a lot of playoff success without Barry Trotz and having Lambert as their coach? Because I know throughout the season, a lot of people wanted Lambert fired.
Yes. Um, I at first I was a big fan of the Lambert promotion. Obviously, with a guy like Trotz gone, it's hard. It's a lot of pressure, especially even for a guy like Lambert, who is, I'm sure, one of Barry Trotz's close friends after all those years of working together. It's big shoes to fill. Barry Trotz is an all-time great coach. Fans definitely were expecting a Barry Trotz like guy in him, and the team struggled. I think that I understood where people were coming from. You have to give the guy a chance. I think there was a point in the season where I was starting to agree with people. Lambert, he's not experienced enough as a head coach to carry this team. And I think that will be one of the biggest problems that the Islanders will face round one. Hopefully, if they get further in the playoffs, it'll be definitely, I think, visible that coaching is not Barry Trotz coaching. I think that will be evident, but that doesn't necessarily mean an elimination or, getting swept or getting eliminated in 5 games. You want to see this team, 6-7 game series, hopefully win it. I think that it will be clear, though, that it's not a Barry Trotz system anymore. And, the team every game is becoming further away from Trotz because it's becoming more Lambert. I think that will be a problem, but I don't think that it's necessarily like this team's kryptonite. I think that they can persevere, and it's all up to these players if they can adjust to Lane's system. Because I don't think that he has a bad system. I think that it's just the players following it and them meshing with the system. It's not necessarily a bad system if it's not working immediately. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time, especially with two new guys. Horvat and Engvall. They're brand new. It takes a little bit of time. So I think that they can do it, but I think that this team going to the playoffs is going to be definitely a new experience without their
And
guys.
and what are your thoughts essentially on the defensive core and essentially Alexander Romanov, who's the newest face on this D core that was acquired by the New York Islanders this past offseason? Do you think this D core can take the likes of the Boston Bruins, or who are one of the best defensive teams in the league, or maybe shutting down a team like New Jersey or the Carolina Hurricanes? Because we do know that the Islanders are going to most likely make the first or second wild card spot. So those are the three teams that they're potentially or most likely going to face. So can this decor take down essentially Goliath in this scenario?
Right. The Islanders are not unfamiliar with being the underdog. They, thrive being hated on, being slept on. It seems, you've seen it in the 2021 playoffs, even the 2020 playoffs. They're underrated and they come out on top. I wouldn't be shocked to see it again. You look at, teams' defensive pairings on the Bruins, Hurricanes, and you see stars. You just see like 2, 3 potentially all-star caliber players. That's intimidating, definitely. Like the Bruins, with McAvoy, their newest acquisition, Dmitry Orlov. It's definitely intimidating, but it all depends if these guys are on their game. Eve Dobson has had his struggles as of recently on the defensive end. Sebastian Aho, is a flaky guy here and there. Romanov, I've seen get so much hate and then so much love. I feel like people can't decide if they like him or hate him yet. If these guys are on their game, I don't think there's anyone that can stop them.
And, in terms of defense, we also have to give credit to the goalie. And in this case, they have two goalies that are fantastic. So Eli Sorokin, who is most likely the most slept on goaltender probably in the league, a guy who deserves a lot more credit. And he does receive credit by the New York Islanders fan base. But when you look at the conversation for Vezina, it's always the same guys: Allmark, Vasilevsky, Hellebuck, and so on and so forth. Sorokin, just because he plays on the Islanders, I believe he doesn't get as much love, but he is probably a top three goalie heading into the playoffs if the Islanders make the playoffs. Not only that, you have Varlamov, who has a lot of playoff experience as a backup goaltender in this scenario with the New York Islanders. He has what it takes, to potentially get a couple of games too, if Sorokin is falling short, because Varlamov was a starter for most of his career and was in the playoffs for most of his career. So having Varlamov as a mentor to Sorokin helps that they're both Russian. So it's just a really good duo, a very underrated duo in my opinion. Can Sorokin steal the show and maybe steal a couple of games against teams like Boston, Carolina, or the New Jersey Devils?
I absolutely think that Sorokin could win games for this team. Obviously, defense needs to play in front of him. The forwards needs to play, their top game. But I really think having a goalie like Sorokin is truly the difference maker. It's obvious, it'd be stupid for me to say, "Oh, the goalie's a difference maker," because that's clear. But having a goalie like Sorokin, where you've seen him face 50 shots and he lets one or nothing. When he's on his game, he's unstoppable. We've seen back-to-back shutouts how many times in his career. This guy can just really put on a show, and he is not he's not opposed to playing big games and big moments. He doesn't even seem nervous. This guy it's natural for him. And a guy like Varlamov has so much experience, like you said, especially even recently, him and Sorokin both have experienced 2020, 2021 playoffs. Even though Sorokin was watching for a lot of the earlier games in 2020, you still saw, he still gets that playoff feel even in the bubble. Playoff hockey is different with fans, no fans, doesn't matter. It's not regular season hockey. And he clearly is receptive to that. And I think that having these two guys is, I don't think this is a hot take, but this is the strongest part of our team. And this is the difference maker heading into the playoffs.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. in order to go on a playoff run, you need consistent goaltending. And whether it's from Sorokin or Varlamov, it's fantastic either or. But we all know for a fact that Sorokin is the future of the New York Islanders,
Mhm.
and he's going to be one of the best goaltenders for years to come. In terms of the standings now, so as of right now, the New York Islanders are first in a wild card spot, but they're competing with the likes of the Pittsburgh Penguins, Florida Panthers, Ottawa Senators, Buffalo Sabres, and people could even throw in the Washington Capitals, but I highly doubt it. So they do have the most games played here. We do know that obviously not going to be working for them. It's going to be working against them since everyone below them have games in hand. But do you believe that despite having the most games, that the New York Islanders will make the playoffs? And where do they make the playoffs? And what's the ideal matchup for the Islanders heading to the playoffs?
So, you look at the standings, and this has been consistent for the last month, 2 months. You always see that the Islanders have the most games played, and of course, that won't work for them, like you said. It's going to be hard watching those last couple of games because it's very possible that the Islanders' playoff positioning, or if they make it, could be completely determined by, a game between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. You don't even know. It could be determined by another team, which that's difficult. That it's possible that Pittsburgh could win and now the Islanders are out of the playoffs, or, they're in the second wild card. I want to say that the Islanders will end up in wild card one, but those games in hand definitely can push them down to the second wild card spot. Any of the opponents that the Islanders will play are going to be extremely talented, relentless, playoff built teams. So there's no perfect opponent. I know as of a couple days ago, the Islanders were projected to play Carolina, and Carolina's an incredible team and would definitely give the Islanders a run for their money. I think whoever they play, they're gonna put up a good fight. I think that playing Carolina is not their worst situation though. I would
Yeah.
not be I wouldn't be upset if they played Carolina, but they're Carolina's not a team to joke around about. They are the real deal.
Yeah, they are the real deal. But I think out of those three teams that we've spoken about, the Hurricanes would be the quote unquote easiest
Absolutely.
to face.
Hmm.
I know they have a good history against Boston in the playoffs, but that's with uh, some players that are currently not on the New York Islanders team, and also their head coach at the time, Barry Trotz, who helped them, take down the Boston Bruins. Personally, just for the craps and giggles, I would love to see the Battle of New York, the Islanders versus the Devils. I think that would be fantastic. I think there would be so much buzz surrounding that. And not only that, but the Islanders, the Rangers, and the Devils all acquired top end talent at the deadline, and seeing them duke it out in the first round would be fantastic. And it would be a major upset if the Islanders would beat the Devils, because I know everyone's went crazy with Timo Meyer being a Devil and Jack Hughes is having an MVP season. So ideally, I would love to see, you know, the Battle of New York.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I'm a neutral fan, I would love to see it. As an Islander fan, it would definitely be anxiety producing to watch the Islanders play a team of, the caliber that they have. But the thing that New Jersey might not have as much as some other teams is playoff experience, like a guy like Jack Hughes. I don't believe he's ever seen a play in round, playoff round, nothing to my knowledge. But obviously, I'm not a Devil fan, so I could be wrong about that. I think that's where they might bump into some trouble. I don't believe they've made the playoffs since Taylor Hall was a Devil. So I think that will definitely be something that could, show to be a problem for them. But if the Islanders played the Devils, that would absolutely be an incredible matchup. I know that also the Rangers playing the Devils is a very possible. And right now, I believe that's the likely matchup. And that would be, as a fan of neither the Rangers, obviously, or the Devils, that would be an incredible matchup to watch as well.
And the last question for today's episode, just taking a look at the stats, we do know who are key players this season, right? But is there anybody that's disappointing that needs to step their game up heading into the playoffs? We do know that, the key piece here for the Islanders to potentially steal games is goaltending with Sorokin and Varlamov. But is there anybody, just looking at the stats here, that have been very underwhelming this season that should be a lot better? And are you hoping for those players in particular to step up when it matters the most in the playoffs?
Looking at the stats, you can see the breakdown. Obviously, some guys are lower on the list, but have missed a bunch of games. Like, obviously, you see Wahlstrom at 16 points, but he's only played 35 games. Someone that stands out to me is Sebastian Aho with 18 points in 61 games. I honestly would have expected less from him. Same with Matt Martin with 19 points in 65 games. I believe that's either career highs or close to for both, which is, I mean, great with 17 games left in the season. You definitely you want to see Kyle Palmieri to continue what he's been very good as of recently, but he had that patch where he was not as effective. You want to see him continue that. Honestly, you see guys like Clutterbuck not produce much, 8 points, 34 games, but Clutterbuck, injuries all season. You can't expect much from this guy. He's a fourth liner, big hitter. Honestly, I'm pretty happy overall with production this season, especially with guys like, Preezy. You look at his play, you look at any game film, you're going to be thrilled. This guy, I've never seen a player have as much jump, as Preezy has. Honestly, overall, I'm pretty happy with the production so far this season from everyone. But obviously, you want to see every single player step up their game in the playoffs and, continue producing even more than they did in the regular season.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. And the last thing I don't want to really like put any expectations on the New York Islanders because we have yet to find out if they're going to make the playoffs. But what's the furthest the New York Islanders could go in terms of a playoff run if they make the playoffs?
All the way. This team, once they make the playoffs, they're a different animal. Obviously, they'll be going against some crazy playoff calibers and understatement. These teams are going to be stacked, ready to go. But you've seen it in 2020, you've seen it in 2021. Playoffs are a different animal. And this team, once they get there, they are a lot harder to knock out than people think. I think that I would love to see them make it to the second round. I would absolutely love to see them to the Eastern Conference Finals. But you can't put that expectations that if it's a failure, if they don't win the cup. This team started off the season slow. I'd love to see them make it to the second round. That would be where I'd really like to be. But of course, you want to win a Stanley Cup.
Perfect. Well, my thoughts on that are a little bit different. I believe if they face Boston, unfortunately, it's a first round exit. But if they face the Hurricanes or the Devils, I believe they could make it as far as potentially Eastern Conference Finals. I would say that because the Islanders, every time they make the playoffs, I think they're always a team that are always underlooked. They're always regarded as a defensive minded team, and they always catch teams by surprise. So I think once again they're going to be looked at, like that once again, and they're going to surprise a team or two if, you know, everything goes well. But I would just like to say thank you so much for coming on the podcast here today. I hope the New York Islander fans are satisfied with today's content, and hopefully we didn't upset anybody. And we'd like to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. Where do the New York Islanders finish in terms of the standings? Do they make the playoffs? How far do they go into the playoffs? Can we see Pajot, Barzal, Wallstrom, and Clutterbuck healthy and in time for playoff action? Guys, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Young Guns Podcast.